Have the New York Giants built up enough of a core to close the gap with the Philadelphia Eagles? That, plus whose stock is rising and whose is falling after a week of training camp, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, coming your way next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina. Happy to have you on this day off edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. I had to pause there for a second because days off just seem so few and far between. And even when it's a day off and the Giants aren't practicing, it's never a day off for me. And that's okay because I love what I do. I love bringing you these videos and giving you, some insight and sharing what I can with you. So I want to thank y'all for tuning in to the Locked On Giants podcast, making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And you, of course, can find me at Patricia_Traina on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram at Patty Traina, PATTITRAINA. That's where I'm posting videos, audio clips, all kinds of cool things. I'm trying to really step up my game. So trying to bring you the best possible New York Giants coverage I can. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, I saw something yesterday, or I heard something in Leonard Williams' presser, and it got me thinking about, have the Giants close the gap with the Eagles? And I'm going to give you probably a surprising opinion about that. So we're going to talk about that to open the show up. And then we're going to flip over to camp risers and fallers after 1 week, because believe it or not, the Giants have now been at it for 1 week with practices. I know it's still kind of early. There's only been one padded practice, but we do have some risers and fallers that we want to talk about. So that is today's agenda for the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, thank you for tuning in. Let's get into it. All right. The big question, how much, if any, did the New York Giants close the gap between themselves and the Eagles? The Eagles being the cream of the crop in the division and possibly one of the two top teams in the NFC conference. And we go back to the end of last year, and we know that Joe Schoen, that was one of the objectives that they wanted to do. But here's the thing. To expect Joe Schoen to close the gap in one offseason, or technically his second offseason, but I consider it one offseason because he had better resources. He had a better salary cap situation to deal with. To expect him to do it in one offseason was kind of a stretch. So I said, I got to thinking, these last couple of days, and I said, I don't know if the Giants necessarily closed the gap with the Philadelphia Eagles, but I mean, and I'm talking from a roster perspective. I don't think you can say, if you go down the roster, that the Giants have closed the gap at every spot with the Eagles. But I think what Joe Schoen has done, and I want to talk about that in this segment, is he has closed the gap in some of the most glaring areas. And if you think back to the last 3 games, all sweeps by the Eagles, by the way, including a couple blowouts, where were the Giants most overmatched, right? In the pit. Can we all agree that in the pit is where they were most overmatched? The run defense could not keep up with the Eagles. The pass rush just couldn't keep up with it. So now you go back and you look at what Joe Schoen did in the offseason with beefing up the run defense, adding Bobby Okereke, Raheem Nunez-Roches, having Dexter Lawrence signed for the long term. Leonard Williams is back. The Giants have started to close the gap there with the Eagles. Now, a question came up to Leonard Williams, and I thought his answer, didn't really say much, but I thought the question was a valid one. And that is, the Giants now have Dexter Lawrence under contract for the long term. Leo, we'll see if he's going to be back next year, but he's definitely here for this year. Azeez Ojulari is a young core piece. Kayvon Thibodeau is a young core piece. Bobby Okereke is still kind of young. So you look at the front 7 of the New York Giants, And can we all agree that it's a lot better than what it was last year? I think we can. I mean, I know I can. I think it was a lot better. And what the Giants are trying to do, I think, is put a core in place, not just on the defensive side. We'll talk about the offense in a little bit, but particularly on the defensive side. So if they're able to keep a healthy Dexter Lawrence, if Leonard Williams, who's only 29 years old, which is not old in real life, but it's kind of ancient when you're talking about a football player, if they can keep him healthy, if they can keep Azeez Ojulari healthy, and so far, knock on wood, he's made it through practices. If they can keep Kayvon Thibodeau healthy, if they can keep Xavier McKinney healthy, that's a pretty good, solid core on the defensive side of the ball. And, we're still waiting to see what happens at the cornerback position. Deonte Banks is still kind of getting his feet wet and getting, the old baptism by fire. Adoree Jackson, he's going to be back, but he's got to stay healthy. But I think when you look at the Giants on the defensive side of the ball, what Joe Schoen has done to kind of close the gap with the Philadelphia Eagles is he's laid down a fresh core of players, some of whom he inherited, but some of whom he's added. And, obviously we've got to get to the games and see for ourselves. But I think they have pretty much laid down a pretty decent core on the defensive side of the ball. So we'll see if they better hold up when they face the Eagles, because right now the Eagles, and you can make a case also for the 49ers being the litmus tests on the Giants' schedule. And certainly, I talk about how the Giants, if they're going to make any waves, they've got to do so in the division. They've got to start winning the divisions. And the Eagles are really the true litmus test, not so much Dallas, but Philadelphia. Now, I do want to mention the offensive side of the ball, because that's also important when you're talking about closing the entire gap. On the offensive side of the ball, again, sticking with the pit, you've got Andrew Thomas, who is now locked up for the next, several years, 7 years, whatever it is. Evan Neal, who, despite his struggles, they're counting on him becoming a solid piece. John Michael Schmitz, a rookie, but a lot of promise there. So they've got 3 guys on that offensive line that should be solid, consistent guys for them if they stay healthy for years to come. Now at the guards, a little less certainty there. We still don't know who the left guard is going to be. I think they want it to be Joshua Ezeudu, but right now the fact that they keep rotating guys in and out at that spot tells me that they just don't know yet. Mark Lewinsky, I don't think is long-term, but maybe down the line they get another young guard, or maybe they have somebody on the roster that, they like, that will ultimately take over that spot. But 3/5 of that offensive line, if it's healthy, it's not a bad line. And, that's what you really want. You want to start building in the trenches. And that's where the Giants all too often last year got beat, not just by Philadelphia, but by other opponents as well. So just again, to summarize, Joe Schoen, you're not going to rebuild an entire roster into a powerhouse in one offseason. You're probably not going to do it in 2 off seasons, especially when your first offseason was just marred by a terrible cap situation. But Schoen systematically is building up this team. He picked out which players he inherited are core players that he wanted moving forward, and he's been adding to that group. And, when I think of reasons to be optimistic for 2023 and beyond, I look at that because Schoen, he didn't come in here with a big old broom and say, okay, I'm going to sweep everybody out. I don't care who they are. Anybody associated with the previous regimes, they're out of here. I'm going to replace them with my guys. And that's something I think some general managers and head coaches, for that matter, make that mistake. And how good is it to have a GM and a head coach who put their egos aside and said, okay, we're going to be open-minded about these guys and who we want as the core players of our franchise. I think it's just absolutely refreshing. And it's the right way to build the franchise, by the way. So, The Eagles and the Giants, there's still a gap because remember, Howie Roseman had a head start on Joe Shane in building that roster up, but it won't be too long, I don't think, before Joe Shane gets that roster to where it needs to be. So lots to be encouraged about. But again, it all boils down to, are they going to stay healthy? That's the key. And if they don't stay healthy, do they have the depth behind them to fill in? So that's what we're going to find out in the coming weeks and months. All right, coming up next, we're going to take a look at risers and fallers in training camp after 1 week. Do not go anywhere. All right, New York Giant fans, we've got plenty more coming up on the Locked On Giants podcast. But first, these days, every new potential hire can feel like high-stakes wagers for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, right? So that's why you have got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. I myself have used LinkedIn Jobs to find aspiring writers and editors for Giants Country, the site I run over on SI's Fan Nation. And the process is not only super easy, but it's a big time saver. All you have to do is add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. And simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so that you can quickly prioritize whom you like to interview and hire. So don't spend time sorting through endless resumes and dead-end leads. Put LinkedIn Jobs to work for you today for free by visiting linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and the Giants didn't have a practice today. Today, of course, being Wednesday. Yeah, I got that right. It's Wednesday. You kind of lose track of the days when you're in training camp. At least I know I do. But no practice for the Giants on Wednesday. They're back on Thursday. It'll be a morning practice on Friday, and then a Saturday night practice before a day off Sunday. And then the following week, the Giants going to Detroit. So that's the schedule. And as long as there's a practice, I will bring you a podcast. And even though there's no practice today, I'm still bringing you a podcast because a lot of you have been just, writing in and saying how much you've been enjoying the show. And as long as you want the show, I'm here for you folks with different perspectives and whatnot. And on this segment, I'm going to start talking about some camp risers and fallers. And basically, it's been 1 week since the Giants have opened training camp or started their practices. But we're already getting some clues, I think, as to who's on the rise and who's kind of, fallen into the bubble area. So we'll talk a little bit about that in this segment. And we'll start off with a riser, Cordell Flott, cornerback. Now, last year, Cordell Flott, everybody knows, was a rookie, had some injury issues, didn't really look, consistent or steady, whatever you want to call it. There was concern that, would he be able to hold up because I think he weighed in at like 175. Cordell Flott went to work this past offseason, put on some muscle. Now, over on my Instagram account, which I think, again, it's at Patty Traina, PATTITRAINA, I posted a picture of Cordell Flott, and you can kind of see he's bulked up a little bit in the upper body. The Cordell Flott, who played the slot cornerback spot at LSU, has been competing for that spot with the Giants. And you know what, folks? He's looked pretty good at it. So, I know there was some question by some people who said, well, is he really a slot cornerback in the NFL? My feeling is if they've been a slot cornerback in college, really, why wouldn't they be able to translate into the NFL at that spot? So Cordell Flott has looked good. And he's really making a push for that, and with Aaron Robinson, who also played slot cornerback in college, Aaron Robinson, of course, on the PUP list, his star, he's got to get on the field. And the longer those guys on the PUP list sit on the PUP list, the less likely they're going to make any kind of contribution. So Cordell Flott taking advantage of the opportunities. Now, Cordell Flott has not been exclusively the slot quarterback. You've seen Adoree Jackson in there. Sometimes you've seen Xavier McKinney in there, but it does look like Cordell Flott is the front runner for that position. So in terms of a faller, what does that mean? It means Darnay Holmes is starting to fall. And I've mentioned before with Darnay Holmes, he's got a $2.7 million cap hit. He hasn't been horrible, but he's been inconsistent. And I really believe, with the Giants needing cap money, with, the other options now that they have, they can better match guys up, play better matchup football, which I've been talking about like on this show for well over several weeks now. I think Darnay Holmes, his stock, if you will, is starting to slip. And I could see him potentially not making the 53-man roster. So, I mean, look, I feel bad saying that about the kid because he plays hard. He tries. He puts in the time and the effort. But it is what it is. And that seems to be how things are trending at the slot cornerback position. Stock up or risers. I'll give you two at the same position. Darian Beavers and Micah McFadden at inside linebacker. Now, obviously the question was, who was going to be the second guy next to Bobby Okereke? And I don't know necessarily that after a week we can say that one of Beavers or McFadden is going to be the guy. I think it's kind of still even, but I think maybe Beavers has a slight advantage, but certainly McFadden has been a nice surprise. He's worked with the ones at inside linebacker, looked good. Beavers has looked really good. He's more of a downhill thumper type. McFadden, I think, has a little bit more, agility to him to where he can maybe do a little bit of coverage stuff. Not that you want him to do coverage, but yeah, I think McFadden, I go back to last year when he was a rookie and how he was thrown in head first and he kind of struggled a little bit. So I think he's taking advantage of the fact that Gerard Davis, who I think would have been the favorite to be the guy next to Okereke, Gerard Davis on IR. So good for McFadden for stepping up, and good for Beavers for putting behind him that knee injury that just, brought his world to a screeching halt last summer. All right, so on the downside then, at inside linebacker, Carter Coughlin. I really don't know what his future is going to be with this team. My guess is obviously it's going to come down to special teams. Now, I believe Carter Coughlin had more tackles. He might have been the team leader last year in special teams tackles. That being said, watching the gunner drills, I don't recall seeing him too often with the gunner drills. Cam Brown has been more of a, in that role. Cam Brown's got the length, the size, the speed, the physicality. So I don't see the Giants keeping both Cam Brown and Carter Coughlin. I just would be surprised. I mean, it would have to take an injury for them to keep both of those guys. So I've got to put Carter Coughlin in the faller category. Again, he's come in, he's worked hard, but, Beavers and McFadden, I think they're going to be linebackers 2 and 3. Okereke, obviously linebacker number 1. So that's how I see that playing out at inside linebacker. All right, let's flip over to running back. Now, obviously, at the start of training camp, we all thought Saquon Barkley was going to be a holdout. And we figured, it'd be a great opportunity for, the rest of the guys on the depth chart. Eric Gray, Gary Brightwell, Jashawn Corbin, Matt Breida. And of course, lo and behold, Saquon signed. And in the meantime, they had the Giants had signed James Robinson to add to that mix. So now, what are we looking at here? I think risers, Eric Gray and Gary Brightwell. I've seen Gary Brightwell get a lot of reps and hasn't looked too bad with it. And Gary Brightwell can also give them snaps on special teams. Eric Gray hasn't really jumped out at me yet, but I don't see them, parting with him just yet. I'm going to be looking for him in the preseason games. James Robinson, I don't know that he's going to survive the roster cut. I mean, if I had to give him a status, I would say he's probably a faller. And Jashawn Corbin, I'd probably give him as a faller as well. I mean, just Saquon showing up kind of mixed up the or toppled, toppled the rep. I think the reps that the guys were going to get. So Corbin, could he land on the practice squad? I mean, if they can sneak him through there, absolutely. I don't think he's going to have a chance though for the 53-man roster. And Robinson, I just don't, after 1 week, he hasn't really done anything that made me say, wow, I got to pay closer attention to him. But again, we'll see what happens with the games because that's going to tell us a lot more. Let's go over to outside linebacker. The Giants, as we know, at the start of training camp, they finally parted with Ellerson Smith, who just could not stay on the field. And they brought in this guy, Tashawn Bauer. And you know what? I've written his number down a few times in my notes. This guy has made a few plays and looked active. And, I don't know how that's going to shape out. I think, you've got your first three outside linebackers are going to be Thibodeau, Ojulari, and Jihad Ward. Your fourth guy potentially could be Bauer. And then is it going to come down to Tamon Fox, O'Shane Ximenez? I think Bauer just early on, it's early again. And the patch just went on for the first time yesterday. But I like what I've seen from Bauer. Ximenez, I haven't really seen, as much. I mean, he's got a quick first step. But I want to see how he does against the run because that's been his Achilles, if you will, in his NFL career. And I'm wondering if maybe Tamon Fox, even though he showed some promise last year, is he in danger of sliding off the roster? I could see that being the case. So, outside linebacker is just interesting. They really, other than Bauer, because, of the injury to Ellerson Smith, they really didn't bring in anybody new. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Also with stock report, I'll give you one more. Jason Pinnock at safety. Now, remember, folks, I know I've said this before. I know I've written this over on Giants Country. Jason Pinnock, at the end of last year, was starting to come on. And he had an injury that he was rehabbing from in the springtime. I think he had a shoulder issue and he wasn't able to take part in the OTAs and whatnot, but he's healthy now. And he is really starting to grab onto that, safety role next to Xavier McKinney. Now, what has that meant for some of the other guys who are now you could put in the faller category? Dane Belton, haven't seen a whole lot from him yet. Bobby McCain, I mean, I've seen them move Bobby McCain to cornerback, which, tells me that, okay, if he came in here primarily as a safety and now they're moving him around, maybe they're just trying to find a fit for him. So that would be a concern. And we know that, they cut Trenton Thompson, before the start of camp. So you kind of get the impression, at least I do, that Pinnock, that other safety job is Pinnock's to lose. And Belton and McCain, I'm not saying that Belton won't make the roster. I think he will, maybe as the third safety. But McCain, I'm starting to wonder if maybe there's going to be a spot for him on the roster. Of course, it's going to depend on, how they, what they do there. And don't forget, Nick McLeod has also been cross-training to play safety. So McLeod can play cornerback and safety. I don't think the Giants keep both McCain and McLeod. I think right now, if I had to take a guess, McLeod may have the competitive edge there when you're talking, at that position. So those are a few of the stock risers, the stock report, the ups and the downs, the risers, the fallers, whatever you want to call it. Coming up next, we'll talk a little bit about some other observations and thoughts from training camp. So please don't go anywhere. All right, Giant fans, we've got more coming up on today's Locked On Giants podcast. But first, the month of August is here. And you know what that means. The official start of fantasy football drafting month. Get championship ready for your home league by trying out Best Ball on Underdog Fantasy. All you do is one live snake draft. There's no waivers, no trades. Underdog sets your best lineup for you every week. Try it out with Underdog's Best Ball Mania tournament. The largest fantasy football contest of all time is back and even bigger with $15 million of total prizes up for grabs, including an absurd $3 million going to the winner. Visit underdogfantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with the promo code LOCKEDON to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's Underdog Fantasy promo code LOCKEDON. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and we're just continuing right along with our summer training camp coverage. How cool is it to have football to talk about again? I mean, it was those 6 weeks that we had off. They went quickly, and I'm kind of glad they went quickly. You know, we kept up with the shows. Those of you who are just now coming back, maybe you took a little time off from the Locked On Giants podcast. We did early opponent previews. So if you get a chance, go back and listen to or watch some of those previews. Yeah, I think we covered every single opponent on the Giants 2023 schedule. And we got some great info from our fellow Locked On hosts. So please, if you do get a chance, and there's no new episode of the Locked On Giants podcast, check those out if you can. All right, in this segment, let's talk about some concerns that I have. And there's really one big concern I think I have with regards to where the Giants are at. Keeping in mind, again, it's only been 1 week of training camp. And that is the response that Brian Daboll gave to a question about at what point would you like to settle the offensive line? And basically Daboll was like, the players are going to settle it. Meaning, through competition, the players will figure out who's, going to start at left guard, who's going to be at center, and so on and so forth. I don't know why, folks, but that answer kind of, didn't sit well with me. I know what Daboll was trying to say, but the way I interpreted it as they don't know just yet who's going to be on that starting offensive line at left guard. And the proof's kind of been in the pudding because they've had Ben Bredesen try it. Joshua Zudo has tried it. They even moved Tyree Phillips there, as I mentioned, on a show earlier in the week. And Tyree Phillips, I had a chance to speak with him. He's never played that position before for the Giants. He's played it in Baltimore, but this summer was really the first time he took snaps at that left guard spot. So I always say that when it comes to the offensive line and you are rotating guys in at a position, that's a sure sign that you don't know which direction you're going and you're just letting them compete, and whoever pulls ahead in the race is the man. And it's still, there's still a lot of preseason and training camps to go, but at some point you would like to think that they would like to have that position settled because you want to build up the camaraderie. You want to build up the verbal and nonverbal communication, because how many times in the past have we seen, especially when the offensive line has had injuries, we have seen situations where guys have come in and the communication on stunts or handoffs on double team blocks just wasn't there. So you want to give these guys an opportunity, plenty of opportunity to mesh together. And these different combinations, I appreciate what the Giant coaches are trying to do, but I question whether or not that's going to actually help them. It's almost like, okay, let's just throw it into the pot and we'll see what comes out of it. And at some point, you got to say, okay, you know what? Maybe it's not perfect, but we're going to roll with Andrew Thomas and Evan Neal at the tackles, Glowinski and, say, Bredesen at left guard, and John Michael Schmitz at center, and just roll with it for better or for worse. So that's probably my biggest concern right now with this Giant team is the fact that they're still trying to figure out that offensive line. And again, I know, folks, it's only been 1 week of training camp, but look, this question has gone back to the OTAs. Let's not forget about the OTAs and, the phase 2 of the offseason program. They've had some time to kind of try and sort these things out. And the fact that they're still kind of playing around with it, at some point they've got to settle it. and to say, okay, well, the players are going to settle it. Again, I know what Dable is saying, but at some point, it's kind of like when a quarterback stands there and he's constantly audibilizing and changing the play and changing this up, playing this constant chess match, and then the clock runs out and you get a penalty. Well, at some point you got to just say, okay, you know what? We figured out to the best of our ability that this is what we need to do, and we're just going to run it and see if the other team can beat us. That's what I'd like to see with the offensive line. And, it's such a delicate position because, look, if that offensive line isn't good, then the whole offense is going to go down the tubes. So I'm just kind of curious to see how that's going to play out. But right now, I would say that's probably my number one concern with the Giants, after 1 week of training camp. Hopefully in the next, couple weeks, they sort it out and figure it out. If you were to ask me what I think the starting offensive line is going to look like, I would probably say, obviously Andrew Thomas and Evan Neal at the tackles. I do think John Michael Schmitz is going to win the center job, despite the fact that he's been rotating with Bredesen in there. Left guard, I'm getting the feeling it's going to be Bredesen at left guard. He played it well last year, and I can appreciate them wanting to get Joshua Ezeudu in there, but Ezeudu lost half of his rookie season due to an injury. So, you got to think that his development might have fell a little bit behind in the time that he had to miss. So I don't know. I just think maybe Ezeudu is maybe the future at that spot, or maybe even possibly at right guard. They might try him, after Glowinski moves on. But again, I sure hope that they figure it out sooner than later and not let this run down to the last week of training camp, because the more snaps that the eventual starting five can get together, the better off they're going to be, and the better off that offense is going to be. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, I want to thank you for tuning in. The Giants are back at practice on Thursday. So as I've been doing with the practice reports, as soon as I get back to my home studio, I will tape a podcast for you and I will push it out. I won't make you wait for it. I'll get it out right away so that you can tune in and check out all the latest and greatest. So until then, everybody, again, thank you for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. I'm Patricia Traina. I will see you tomorrow, Giant fans.